This is a Film Stories original podcast.
Hey, it's me, Tyler. Bose open earbuds are stylish. The color, it looks almost like an earring. I feel like it could go with anything. The music I'm making right now feels like a holiday. I want to look like it too. Check out Bose.com for more.
This is Writers on Film, the only podcast dedicated to books on cinema.
Welcome, everybody, to John Bleasdale's fantastic podcast. And you may notice something different, that I'm not John Bleasdale, that I'm Ian Nathan. And for one episode only, I have taken the helm as the interviewer, and John is the interviewee, because he's written a marvelous book about Terrence Malick. And it'd be kind of weird to kind of interview someone else about your own book. So I've stepped in as the question master to pin John down on what's been, I think, a dream project for him. You know, we've known each other for a number of years now, and along the way, he's often mentioned how much he wants to write a book and he's got ideas, and Malick came up a lot. And I think it's fantastic that we're now the other side of the process, and I can talk to you about your experiences of that. So this is a story as much about John as it is about Terrence Malick. Okay, John, my first question really is, why Malick? Why was he was he your first idea? But why is he your first? You know, I know you've written novels, but your first published book on a director.
Thanks, Ian, and thanks for doing this. The first thing I ever wrote on film was a book review of Hannah Patterson's anthology on Terrence Malick and philosophy. So there's a weird poetry to the fact that I started writing in film and in film criticism with Malick as my subject. And the headline of that, which is you can still find on the internet, the headline of that book review was "Please make more films, Mr. Malick." And because at that stage I think he'd only made 3, because it was just after Thin Red Line had come out. But it might have even been, the book might have even not featured Thin Red Line, because it was a really late 90s book. So Terrence Malick has always been a really strong influence on me and a really strong presence. I mean, other than people like Stanley Kubrick and Billy Wilder and Charlie Chaplin, there are lots of other directors who've had an impact. But none of those directors were as mysterious as Malick. And I think it was that element of mystery, that element of someone who is not known and he's not really knowable, that made me curious. And I was very lucky that I interviewed Patrick McGilligan, who is a wonderful biographer in his own right. And he's done the Clint Eastwood. Yeah,
he's done loads, isn't he?
I know. He's did a Mel Brooks one. He's just his next one coming out is Woody Allen, which is going to be I've already said, okay, you've got to come on the podcast and talk about that, because that's And at the end of my interview with him, he said, when are you going to write one for us? And he's like a commissioning editor for Kentucky University Press, and he said to me, who would you do? And I said straight away Terrence Malick without hesitation. And he was like, okay, well, why would you do him? And my reasoning was, first of all, he hasn't made many films, so I don't feel daunted by the prospect of doing it.
I mean, swamped by the number of... I know that experience when you're faced with 40 films and you're like... Oh my God! And
as a filmmaker, you've done who's got the most films? Actually, it's interesting. Ridley Scott.
I think it's Clint Eastwood. I think Eastwood topped it. Yeah. And what you're faced with in those cases, which I think Malick doesn't give you, is not the quantity; it's the compression. It's having to do films in 2 or 3 paragraphs, and where you want to write 20 pages. So that is always the daunting thing, I think. As you know, that there's a limit to the number of pages you're allowed to write by any publisher. It's not like you can just go on forever. And I suppose, as you're saying, Malick is got a kind of containable career.
He certainly has, and they're very easily sort of delineated stages in his career. There are the first 2 films. There's the 3 films of when he comes back, which I think are his big films. And then I think
Thin Red Line, New World, and Tree of Life. Yeah.
And then after that, I think there's a moment where, a little bit like after Days of Heaven, he becomes a little bit disillusioned with the big filmmaking process, and he decides to go small and does what sort of filmmakers, his contemporaries often have promised to do. People like Coppola and George Lucas have often said, I just want to give up these big Hollywood things and make my small arty experimental films. Well, Terrence Malick actually did it. You know, he went and made To the Wonder, Night of Cups, and Song to Song, which are really his kind of almost like his student films. You know, it's almost like he went back in time and did the first bit of his career last, you know. So it was really easy to look at his career and sort of see a structure emerging. And because I knew it had to be a biography, because that was the series, it was about lives, he had to have an interesting life. I felt that there was an interesting life if only I could get to it. You know, I felt there was, he wasn't making, you know, he wasn't Alfred Hitchcock making a film every year for 70 years and just, you know, after a certain point when he starts to make films, it's like, you know, and then he made another one. And after that was released, he made another one, you know.
So, yeah, I mean, you hit upon perhaps the central issue that you're confronted with Terrence Malick, is that he is an enigma, and he's done nothing to, you know, spoil that view of him, because he has, you know, most of his career done next to no interviews. He's intensely publicity shy to the point of not allowing even photos of him to be taken. The few we have are on set or the performances he gave in Badlands. And this creates a mystique, you know, whether he wants it or not, this has created a mystique. And I suppose, you know, when you do a Martin Scorsese or a Steven Spielberg, you know, there are screeds of material and interviews that go back through the career. And there is a kind of very ready mythology in which you can either try and break free of or delve deeper into. But with Malick, you got kind of just a mystery story. So, you know, how did you crack that? How do you go about even finding out, you know, about Terrence Malick?
There were several things that I thought were interesting. I mean, there's several approaches. One was there was a couple of books that had already been written, which were like oral histories, you know, like talk to everybody around him, and you know, he will be this sort of structuring absence, and you can just have everybody else talk about him. And I felt that had been done, so I didn't want to do that. That was one stage. The one had been done by Paul Mayer, and another one had been done by Carlo Hinterman. And Carlo Hinterman has several other authors in Rehearsing the Unexpected. He also did a documentary called Rosy Fingered Dawn, which is available on YouTube. Right. So I didn't really want to do that because, as I say, it'd been done, and I wanted to do a straight biography. You know, I wanted to. Yeah. So I started a little bit influenced by Patrick McGilligan, because his Clint Eastwood book starts with him going through sort of the family history. How did, you know, almost like the cowboy ancestry of Clint Eastwood. So I sort of wanted to work out where Malick came from. So I actually did some research going back into family genealogy and digging up history books and references and whatnot about the fact that he's coming from this northern Iranian city, a Persian city as it would be called at the time, and following the immigration of his paternal grandparents. And that's, you know, the name Malick has this Middle Eastern Persian inflection. So it was really, there was some detective work to be done there. And I found that process really fascinating. But then when I started to dig deeper and I started to talk to as many people around him as I possibly could, I found that a lot of people wanted to talk because, and even if they wanted to talk anonymously, there's quite a few people who said, I don't want to be, but who were very close to him. So I managed to get quite a lot of information which is new and which is in the book, and quite a lot of sort of stories which really hopefully deliver a portrait of Malick which is more human and at once paradoxically gets rid of the enigma and the mystique, and at the same time kind of embellishes it and polishes it and replaces it with another one because people are just mysterious anyway. I remember being terrified when I started I mean, I'd be interested if you have a similar experience when you write your books, because I have this very basic fear when I start writing, which is, will I be able, do I have enough stuff to get the word count? Will I be able to create a book, just a book?
Yeah. I remember when you were just starting out, I think that you were literally been commissioned, and you sent me quite an amusing email just about what the hell do I do now? What now? And the only advice I could give, I said, the only way you can stay sane, because it is so daunting, no matter how long you've got, confronted by these incredible careers and these films and these kind of eras. I said, you just write a series of chapter heads. Just give yourself a sort of map on which you can follow. They might all change. You might throw all those chapters out and write new ones. But if you have a kind of 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, you can kind of, your brain goes, okay, if I do that bit first, that bit, then that bit, and it gets done. And I don't know if all writers do this, but it's a sort of way of managing your own fear. And you think, well, if I can reduce it all to containable little units. And I imagine this is similar to way filmmaking occurs. I mean, Scorsese talks a lot about, I reduce everything to the sequence to the scene to the kind of the beat within the scene, to the camera move, and that's all that matters in that point in time. Get that bit right, and then you expand. And I think that's right. It comes down to the sentence, doesn't it? It comes down to the words you're putting on the page at that point in time. He was born on this date. He begins the thin red line on this date, and following the words.
Yeah, I that was great advice, and I think it's really good. And I did follow it, and I really loved coming up to my room, sitting at my computer, breaking it into pieces, and saying, okay, first of all, where was his father's family from, and then where was his mother's family from, and then how did they get together, and what did they do? And I mean, there are sometimes I had to let things go, because I would think, what did they do between 1954 and 1956? And I can't find out what. And it's like, no one cares about that except you. As long as you can give a general idea. And also the other thing that you find you have to do later on in the process is you find out a load of stuff, and you're so pleased with yourself for finding it out that you have to at some point turn around and throw it out, because it might be interesting to you, but then I found out the name of the milkman, and the milkman name was, and I found out, there's a bit, I was listening to Jack Fisk because I was editing the interview that he gave me, and he talks about where he hired the panel truck that he drove down to La Jolla to La Junta, to film Badlands. And I'm thinking to myself, I bet I put that in draft one. I bet I put the name of the truck hire in. So there's an element of that you're winnowing out. You're gathering that harvest, and then you're winnowing out the chaff and keeping the thing. And then structurally, exactly right, you're telling a story. And I think from a novelist's point of view, and I really found this much closer to writing a novel than I'd expected. From a novelist's point of view, there's something incredibly liberating about having that structure, because when you're a novelist, you're dealing with the sentence and the paragraph and the page as units of meaning, and you're wanting to imbue them with some sort of beauty. But you can very often get to a stage where you don't know what's going to happen next, and that can be quite exhilarating, but it's kind of very, very daunting, Whereas with this, you already knew, following your advice, I already know the name of the next chapter, and I know what the next chapter, so I know what I've got to end this chapter on in order to go into the next chapter. And that made the writing of it really pleasant and really pleasurable, because I wasn't, it was just simply a matter of, okay, and then I'm going to have to get 5 people to talk to me about the making of X film in order to bring together that information. Hopefully some of it will be new.
Would you say, I mean, you said at the beginning that you set out to write a biography. How much, especially because it's Terrence Malick, and his films, are like him in the sense they're very elusive. They suggest enormous amounts of things and great depth, great philosophical depth, to the point where often he's accused of pretension. How much did you get from the films themselves? How much do the films tell us about the man, and how much did you want to Now, I remember I wrote about David Lynch, and the great trap I try to escape from is to try and explain the films, what they mean, because Lynch won't tell you anything, and he loves it that way. And I'm not going to try and do that. But you fall into it very quickly. You're trying to describe the plot. So you describe, well, Eraserhead could be about this, or it could be about that, and it could be about this in his life. How much of that process of looking at Malick's films and then drawing back from them to his life and connecting the dots did you go through?
Well, I think there's a very different series of movies there where the first three movies are very, on the surface, are very non-biographical. They're films about American history. They're period films. Mostly they're American history that he didn't experience, with maybe the exception of Badlands, because he was a young man when that news was hitting about Charles Starkweather and Carol Ann Fugit and the murders they were committing. He was at school reading the newspapers as they came in with those reports. But with those other films, he wasn't in New England when Pocahontas and John Smith were around or anything like that. So from a very basic level, they're not going to be autobiographical, you would think. But then with Tree of Life and To the Wonder and Knight of Cups and to some extent Song to Song, those seem to be a little bit more potentially, especially Tree of Life feels like it's totally autobiographical. And the more I dug in, the more those films had flags popping up all over the place that it was closer and closer and closer to Terrence Malick's life than even had been hitherto suspected. And when I read the script, especially of Tree of Life, the sort of stage directions of what the town looks like and what the backyards look like and what is behind them, suddenly that was, okay, wait, this is just Waco. And, in the original script, there is a scene where a tornado hits Waco, and that happens and that scene was actually shot and is included in the extended version. And the extended version is even more autobiographically rich. It's full of scenes that we know Terrence Malick experienced as a young man. His relationship with his parents was difficult. He lost a brother to suicide when his brother was 19. So the questions and the grief and the striving that is happening within the Tree of Life are very sincerely felt, and I thought, and then you go back to the other films, Badlands and Taste of Heaven, and you suddenly see, actually, wait a second, that's kind of a persistent concern, and that's something that's coming from somewhere. And so Days of Heaven, people who went to his school, St. Stephen's, which is a boarding school in the middle of out in the sticks, near Austin, before Austin was this sort of California and Texas that it is now. His fellow school friend said, oh, Days of Heaven is just based on that school because it's just one place in the middle of nowhere, and that isolation and everything is pure. So it was also interesting to pick on those points. But you are right. The films are about themselves. They are, artifacts of their own, they have their own integrity. But yeah, it was I think the one difference with David Lynch, who of course was a AFI, fellow graduate,
and a Jack Fisk friend as well, very connected. See, SpaceX, it all kind of joins, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And somebody told me that Malick worked very hard behind the scenes to make sure that Elephant Man sort of came to light, and there was a period where Terrence Malick was doing a version of the Elephant Man, and he sort of gave it up as soon as he heard about Lynch's version. It wasn't based on the same property or anything like that, but it was like he was going to do it as a sort of road show, maybe even a theatrical thing. But the difference perhaps with someone like Lynch is Lynch's films, have this are sort of demanding a kind of interpretation, and so him refusing to give it is part of the game. Whereas you feel with Malick's films, especially the first three, you could just watch them as, I hesitate to say conventional films, but you can watch them as films and not need to know anything about the biography of the director. They just exist purely as they are, and work it out as you wish.
Yeah. Is there like an alternative history of Malick? Are there other films he could have made? Certainly in that big early phase in the kind of movie brat 70s Hollywood. Is there a kind of more commercial Terrence Malick we could have come across, or a more artistic one? What are the things he didn't make?
Yeah, well, he had loads of scripts, and he was when he turned up at AFI, he already had a script written. Billy Weber, who is his editor on Days of Heaven, has a whole pile of them, which he is keeping very close to his chest. He told me that the favorite script that he had by Terrence Malick was about Eleanor Roosevelt. He said it was fantastic. Lots of his scripts that he actually wrote in the 70s, he then went on to make in the later on. So he was very deep into making Shay with Benicio del Toro, which was later made with Steven Soderbergh. He wanted to do basically the second Shay, the Bolivia part. That was the sort of thing that he was interested in, because he'd been there. He'd been in Bolivia when Guevara was shot. There's a what other films are there? There's Gravy Train that was made into a movie, which is a very fun exploitation movie. Deadhead Miles was made into a movie. Dirty Harry was made into the movie, though he was doing a rewrite of someone else's script in that case. There was a Steve McQueen movie he wrote that didn't get made, but he did a rewrite on it. When he made Night of Cups. Night of Cups is essentially the story of him as a screenwriter being paid to produce stuff that doesn't get made. It's like, people were saying, oh, it's a screenwriter who doesn't write anything. And it was that, but that's based on his life. That's exactly what he was doing. He was walking from one set to the other, one party to the other, schmoozing, and making lots of money and not much coming out of it, living a quite vacuous experience. And then going off to the desert, which is scenes you have in Night of Cups, where he goes off to the desert, and that's what he would do to write. He would go off and hire a room in a hotel and sit with the air conditioning pumped up and type on his own in complete isolation. And that's something apparently he does to this day, is he goes to airport hotels, hires a room, and just stays there if he needs to write, so he can sort of just cut himself off from the world a little bit.
What do you make of those three films in particular? I mean, To the Wonder, Night of Cups, and Song to Song, in the sense that we'd gone through this. We'd had the two great early films, Badlands and Days of Heaven. We had this kind of bizarre 20-year break where all sorts of rumors flourished about what he was doing. And then he comes back with Thin Red Line, New World, and Tree of Life. And we thought, this is the major filmmaker we always thought he was. Three, fabulous films, very different. And then suddenly he seemed to sort of, in terms of popular opinion, go a bit wonky. He suddenly starts making films very quickly, as you say, in a more indie fashion. There are big stars in them. And the films were almost too Malickian. They were too impenetrable. So what are you, as the guy who's sort of written about him, that era, what springs to mind?
If I have one argument, and it's very much an argument I would sort of have with myself as well, if there's one thing in this book I would like to achieve, it would be to make people go back and watch those films. Because I feel that I'm not saying go back and watch them and reappraise them and say they're perfect. That's not. I think they're experiments, and like any experiment, they're kind of as much. In science, you make experiments to disprove your theory, not to prove it. Yeah. And I think there's an element of that he's pushing things so far that he's actually going beyond what is acceptable certainly for narrative cinema. Maybe for narrative Hollywood cinema to bear, it becomes an experience which is just confounding to the viewer. It's so elliptical. What's happening? Yeah. What have I seen? What is the story? You can walk out of To the Wonder and not know really important plot points which were in the script and which the film is actually kind of meant to be entirely about, and you could walk out of that film. It took me about 3 or 4 viewings before I realized, oh, wait a minute, I think she dies at the end, doesn't she? Spoiler. But you literally could. I mean, I don't even think these films it's possible to spoil because the films themselves don't allow you. And I remember watching it at the cinema. I saw it at Venice when it premiered, and I was sitting next to someone, and before it even started, this person went, "Oh, here we go, here we go. Malik's gonna whisper, voiceover," and I just got up and said, "Okay, I can't. This viewing experience is too fragile and important to sit next to someone who's going to be harumphing. So I'm going off to the other side of the cinema." And I did feel myself struggling to like it and struggling to get into it and trying to work out and it took me more than one viewing to see what was really good in it. I mean, there were lots of things I really enjoyed right from the get-go. I've fallen in love with it as I've watched it repeatedly. People who don't want to do that, I totally accept that. You shouldn't have to watch a film 3 or 4 times, and you shouldn't have to read a book to enjoy a film. That's not. But if you're interested in why did Malick do this? Why did he go from a film with Brad Pitt winning the Palme d'Or to this really bafflingly intense small chamber piece? Well, I think first of all, he'd made it before Tree of Life was out. Right. He'd already done it. He'd gone and which is one of those confounding things about him being someone who spends a lot of time making his films and off is he was almost like, okay, let's make a guerrilla movie. Let's go out, film it. We'll film on Paris streets without any permits. We'll film around this Oklahoman town, which his parents actually lived in. So it was I can spend some time with my folks while I'm filming this. Yeah. And it was ready to, he finished filming the scenes in Paris, then took the train down to Cannes and was there in Cannes when Tree of Life premiered. So
somewhere in the background, presumably floating in a room, he wasn't on the red carpet, was he?
No, he wasn't on the red carpet, but there was a photograph of him with shaking hands with Brad Pitt and hugging him at the when the lights went up. And then when it comes to Knight of Cups and Song to Song, he decided I'll make back-to-back films with the same actors, and I'll have Knight of Cups was supposed to be and Song to Song would both have Christian Bale in them, and other actors like Natalie Portman and Cate Blanchett are in both films, and that was supposed to be all the actors. So you're going to have all the actors in Knight of Cups were going to be in Song to Song, and it didn't work out with Christian Bale, so that actually delayed it. Christian Bale was going to play Michael Fassbender's character, basically, and he actually shot footage and everything. So they just basically wanted to have a rock group. Jack Fisk talks about this a lot, and Chivo talks about this. He wanted to have a band. And they were just going to drive around Austin, jump out, film something, jump back in, drive somewhere else. And the same in LA with Knight of Cups, Chivo, Jack Fisk created these goldfish bowls, they would call them, these areas that they'd already got the permits for, and they'd already sort of mapped out, and they could just drive from one place to the other and film what they wanted there, and drive and film in the car as well. Christian Bale is literally driving from one location to the other whenever you see him, and that's why it becomes one of the wonderful LA films, Yeah. But these are marvelous art films. They're difficult, they're hard, they're all those things. They're not immediately accessible, but wow, fancy winning a Palme d'Or and not doing Tree of Life 2 or doing another big historical period film, which is what he'd basically cut his teeth on, what he'd made his name with, but doing these modern films which are about sex. Song to Song is all about sex. To the Wonder is in 4 different languages. It's as much, English is a minority language in that film. Knight of Cups is just all over the place in a really interesting way. It's some of it is just pure cinema. Some of it's ridiculous. Some of it's silly. Some of it makes you sniff and snigger. It's a dangerous line. You got a dog chasing a tennis ball in a swimming pool, and that seems almost like a meta commentary on the film itself. Am I just a dog in a swimming pool chasing a tennis ball? But I love it. I mean, I got to the point where writing the book, I kind of saw a way into all of these films. And I can't wait for the inevitable Criterion sort of, or whoever will do it, box set, where they bring them all back and they maybe even package them together with some serious scholastic essays from people like, I don't know, maybe someone who's just written a biography could do an essay on them.
Pitching that to Criterion right now, if you're listening.
Or a commentary track even.
Oh, he's available. Let me talk about, we can get a little bit pretentious now because Terence requires that obviously a bit as well. You know, you're writing a biography, but obviously one of the themes of any story like this, and when you write about a very famous artist, is you're trying to work out what creates the artist. Where does it all come from? What are the sources of his talent? What drives him? Do you think you have found, you know, obviously you do, you've written the book, but what is the kind of roadmap you've created where you find out, you know, before he shot a frame of film, what has made Terence Malick?
It's a really funny. It's a great question because it's really difficult with Terence Malick. You know, Scorsese, he'll tell you he was was ill and he was watching TV and he was watching things from
watching the world from the window, the asthmatic kids, you know, and watching the mob guys on the street, you know, all that. Yeah,
the legend is there, and you know, it's obviously rooted in truth. I'm not saying it's become part of the legend, part of a mythos. With Terence Malick, you know, there's a bit of you that thinks, does he actually watch movies himself? Is he someone who goes to the cinema? You know, is he because he doesn't do the things that other directors do. He doesn't turn up and accept awards. He doesn't do masterclasses. I mean, we talk about him not doing interviews, but there are lots of things which the ecosystem of the film industry require a film director to do. You know, Lifetime Achievement Awards, masterclasses, interviews, promoting other people's work has become a real thing now, that Christopher Nolan will interview Steven Spielberg on the release of Fabelmans or something. And so it becomes this sort of lovey-dovey sort of thing. He doesn't do any of that, and he doesn't tell the story of where my cinema comes from. What I've pieced together is his father is an amateur photographer, always loved taking photographs, including of Terry himself, which is one of those things which, you know, I rather use a little bit of Freudian analysis here and think maybe this is the root of him not liking photographs taken. You know, his dad wouldn't stop taking them. But he did learn a lot. His father was a scientist and a chemist and had a very practical turn of mind and an artistic turn of mind. He was like a concert pianist, a concert level pianist, wonderful musician, could easily have had a career as a musician, but had to earn money for his family, so chose the other route, which you see in Tree of Life. Brad Pitt turns to his son and says, you know, I could have been a musician, and, you know, he plays Toscanini and all the rest of it. So there is an element where you see that that's part of the photography, and his Jack Fisk talks about Terry knows about light the way cinematographers don't. And when he was making Days of Heaven with Nestor Almondaras, Nestor said on receiving his Oscar, everything in this film is Terry's, it's not mine, because he knows so much about light. It's in a technical way, not just like he knows what he wants. So there's this idea that he loves light and he loves capturing it. And there's also this idea that he loves literature and thinking about stuff. And I think his films are very literary, not in the sense that they're adaptations, although he has adapted one book in The Thin Red Line, but in the sense that there will be lots of different books influencing and in there, and lots of strains of thought. And I think that's what it ends up being for him. Cinema ends up being a methodology for asking questions. And it ends up being a way of concentrating all of this material, all of this art that he's experiencing, all of this way of looking at the world. And he uses it to experiment and see what happens. And so often when he's directing, that's why he will get rid of the script. That's why he will create accidents and he calls them torpedoes, where he'll send a dog or a child or an actor that nobody knows is on the film into the scene to just see what will happen. Into the Wonder, he has Javier Bardem just walking around deprived neighborhoods of the town, pretending to be a priest and just doing pastoral visits and seeing what happens. He's telling everybody, look, this guy's an actor, he's not a priest, but just pretend he is. And this was so successful that they ended up making a 40-minute sort of supplementary film, Javier Bardem and one of the ADs, of this material. They just said, we've got so much material where these people, even though they knew he was an actor, just started telling him their life story because nobody was listening to these people. So I think that's his root, is this urge to experiment and what we end up is with these end products that to me look like unbelievable artifacts of cinematic work. But I think to Terrence Malick are just partly a byproduct of all these questions he's been asked. And so one of the things I was very surprised with, I was talking to an editor and he would say, you know, he'd be editing a film for like 2 years. In the case of Way of the Wind, it's been, 3 or 4 years? And he's been editing this film, and the editor will say, oh, he never watches them all the way through. He'll be having different editors work on different pieces, and they'll look at sequences or reels, and they'll look at them and look at them and look at them till he gets it right. And he'll only watch it all the way through, like at the end, or you know, once or twice during the whole process, because he doesn't want to get bored of it. He doesn't want to get to the point where he'll watch it all the way through for the 10th or 20th time and not be able to see the film.
What's he like on set? You know, you can picture, because we see footage of Spielberg and Scorsese and all the kind of guys. Some are just sit in chairs and direct from the chair. Some are incredibly active. You know, James Cameron is kind of unstoppable. But what is Terrence Malick like on set? You know, are they very, as you know and I know, movie sets are very practical places. You know, it's an element of a factory, you know, process underway in which the kind of art is very elusive sometimes. And I'm always marvel when it comes to David Lynch that he manages to get an entire production to kind of follow his very weird paths. And you must think the kind of assistant cameraman must be going, what are we shooting? What's this on today's, you know, sites? But what is it like to be on the Terrence Malick set?
So he would turn up at a set with notes that he'd written during the night, including like lines or things he would give to the actors. Sometimes these things would be new lines for them to read, to memorize, to go away while they're getting their makeup done and memorize. Or it might just be a note for the scene, you know, a direction, or even a poem. He would often give people a poem to read or something like that. During the actual filming process, and this has developed, so it's not like, but it's developed always from even Badlands. He was very unconventional. Already on Badlands, he was doing stuff that nobody else on the crew could really understand. Partly due to ignorance, but partly due to this is just how I'm going to do it, and I'm not going to do it any other way. He would go, okay, let's do the same scene again, but don't say your lines. Just do a silent take. Just think your lines, follow the beats, and I'll just film you. So there's lots of bits of film that it's just glances and it's just looks, and I'll use that instead of the line. And then he might, he often speaks all the way through a scene. So he will be instructing the actors, go over there, chase that, do this, look up there. Oh, there's a butterfly. Go after the butterfly, you know. Jessica Chastain getting the butterfly on her finger in Tree of Life. I talked to one guy whose first job, or he became an editor for Malick, but his first job for Malick was going through the rushes of Tree of Life and doing audio editing, taking out Malick's voice so that he could look at the rushes without having to listen to his own voice. So that's another reason there's lots of dubbing, because the sound becomes unusable because he's talking throughout the shot. And he'll often talk very close to the actors, so he has a very intimate relationship with them. Also, it's important to know that he'll play sport. You know, he was a sporting guy right from the very beginning. Brad Pitt said, you know, you put a ball in this guy's hand and whoa, he's away. You know, that gentleness is gone, and he's a real competitor, you know. And I think that's something that, you know, we expect this philosopher king or this poet warrior, and instead There's this. I talked to Tim Blake Nelson, and I mentioned I was doing the book, and he was like, "Oh God, yeah, he's always he." We argued on Thin Red Line about the University of Texas versus my team, and but he had nothing but good things to say about Malick. He loved him, even though he's not much in that film. Yeah.
Tim Blake Nelson's a lovely man, isn't he? Very lovely man. Unbelievably clever, very smart as well, isn't he? He's one of the most sort of extraordinary talkers on his films.
Absolutely, so articulate, and I think he's a great and under appreciated director as well. I think he's The Grey Zone. He's done a film recently called I think it's called Old Henry, which I think is absolutely brilliant.
So, extending from what he's like as a director, I'm really fascinated by what Hollywood think of him, and he's made films that are uncommercial, shall we say? Even his probably most populist films hardly cut the kind of summer blockbuster line. Yet he's got these budgets. Hollywood has gone with him, and they even, when The Thin Red Line came, they backed him for that, which is probably his most expensive film. Maybe you tell me, but it's kind of a big deal. And he hadn't made a film for 20 years. Yet here he comes in 20th Century Fox, back the movie, and he keeps making films, in and out of the system. And is it the mystique of him? Is it now he's in a place where it's just you do the Malick thing, New Line, Back a New World, and he gets the major names to be in his films? What is it about Malick where even Scorsese struggles sometimes to get films made, yet Malick seems to have this position where he's kind of a little bit like Clint Eastwood, just one of the kind of elder statesmen that make Hollywood feel good about itself.
That's a good point. I think that happens definitely at one point in his career. I think he's been hugely consistent in terms of commercial success, as in he's never had any. Even Thin Red Line, which is probably his most popular film, breaks even, makes a bit more money, perhaps on DVD sales and things like that. Probably made an okay profit. It's very difficult to see from the figures. It seems to not have made a profit at all, especially if you do the sort of you need to earn twice as much in order to start earning of the budget. Badlands was an independent film, which was like a Coen brothers Blood Simple. He went out on the road and collected money from family and friends, and there was a tech investor from the North California, and he did presentations, and he put his own money in it. Days of Heaven, he had Schneider, Burt and Harold Schneider, and he did this. So he had them helping him, and Harold Schneider actually put his own money up, and his own sort of collateral was on the line. But these were low budget films. Days of Heaven, which is an epic film, I talked to Jack Fisk. He had like a couple of $100,000 for the, I think it might have been $150,000 for the art budget on that film, which when you watch Days of Heaven, you think, Jesus, this is an amazingly designed film. It's a period film. There's a train in it. There's a house that has obviously been constructed. So these are kind of very medium to low budget movies, especially for the bang for your buck that you get out of them. And when Charles Bluhdorn saw that film, he was like, I'll give you anything you want. You don't have to make $1. I want you making prestige films for Paramount. We've got Rocky and we've got these successes. I want a prestige movie that is going to be part of the conversation. That's what he wanted. That probably led to the 20-year hiatus, because never tell an artist you can do what you want, because then they'll be paralyzed by success. When it comes to the later ones, New World, they definitely took a bath on that. I think he went back, even with Tree of Life. I think already by Tree of Life, he went back to a independent-minded idea of, I'm going to finance this and have multiple investors. I'm going to sell a lot of the foreign rights up front, to the point that the film can't lose money because I've already paid for it. I mean, the distributors might lose money, but we're not going to lose money. The studio's not going to lose money. And the same is true for all these small films, which seem to make zero money, but at the same time, they're kind of still there. They're still being bought. They're still on streaming platforms. So there is money ticking in at some point. And then he comes back with Hidden Life and sort of makes something which is, again, more conventional and more immediately, well, accessible, I guess.
Is there, I mean, this is kind of when you write a book about any one subject, any one person, one of the risks you run is a book isn't enough to contain a life. A film isn't enough to contain a life. So you end up sort of doing overarching things that probably can be a little unfair. These are the things that sum up the career. Scorsese, the Catholic guild, the kind of the mob theme, the immigrant experience. These are kind of the top line things. But beyond, obviously a degree of personal interaction, a degree of sort of, certainly with the earlier films, looking at America and the way America works, and this idea of philosophy that you've been saying, that the questions, come first and the films come after. I find it hard to know what ties Malick's films together, other than this idea that they're Malick's films. That tells me what I'm going to get. But if someone said, "What is that?" I don't know if I could describe it. I mean, your book, is an attempt to describe it, really, isn't it?
But I mean, I think that's kind of what a book should do. I think the like conversation that you have, there's this sort of groupthink that happens, especially amongst journalists, where you all have this decision that about a certain filmmaker which sounds really good and slightly cynical, and you say, "Oh yes, of course, Cronenberg hasn't made a good film since blah blah blah," and and you all feel very good about yourselves, sort of slightly cutting people down to size. And I often feel that about Ken Loach, that I think, "Oh, Ken Loach, Ken Loach is one of the reasons I like film. He's one of the people who got me into film." And sure, he's tailed off a little bit, and he's sort of starts making the same film, over and over for a little while. But then when I'm watching those films, they're more complicated than, Ken Loach doing his thing. That's just such a cynical, easy, dumb way of looking at it. It pretends to an overarching intelligence and aloofness, which is you're not looking at it anymore. You're looking at yourself, And I see with Terrence Malick, I think there's been an element of that, especially with the reception of his latest films, but even the reception with some of the other films, where people say things like, "Oh, it's philosophical," or "It's poetic," or something, and it's like, but what is that? What does poetry mean in cinema? What do we mean by that? When we say something is pure cinema, what does that actually mean? And I think looking at Malick's films is a really good way of trying to get things become more precise in our estimation of how you look at movies. I mean, why are these films not working, and why are these other films working perfectly when the operations that the methodology that the director is using is roughly speaking the same? Days of Heaven is built entirely on ellipses. It's what you don't see which structures the story. It's what people don't know which creates the tragedy. It's how people don't talk to each other, and you get this voiceover doing all this other stuff. We've talked about this at length, and then you go to Song, and it does a similar thing, and yet Song doesn't quite work. And Song, by the way, is a sex film with it has sex scenes in it, which you don't expect from Malick. It has queer narratives. It has the first voiceover line. Again, that's one of the things. Voiceover. Terrence Malick always using voiceover. The first voiceover line is Rooney Mara saying, "There was a time in my life when I could only have sex if it was violent." And you sort of think, hang on a minute, are we getting a bondage movie? Is this that it is about that? It's about a series of relationships which are sort of toxic and destructive, and it's erotic, and nobody notices that. Everybody just goes, "Oh yeah, could be a perfume commercial, loads of things." It's like, you're not watching the movie anymore.
Yeah.
You're not opening yourself to the movie as critics, as an audience member. And that might be the film's point. You might just be finding it boring. But look at it, there's mosh pits in there. I mean, there's Val Kilmer throwing plutonium at the audience in there. At least take it on its own merits, rather than dismissing it as it's like all the others. It's nothing like all the others, And that thing that you're saying about Terrence Malick, what is this thing? Is like that mystique can get in the way. It can contaminate things. It can. He is a very practical person, and some of these films have very interesting and practical ideas to them, and funny jokes and things like that. And people just seem to skate over that because they're taking the top three things that are the same with all the movies, voiceover, use of music. I mean, Magic Hour is a good example, even though I use it as a title for the book, because, the Magic Hour cinematography happens in some films, and in other films, you've got bright sunshine all the way through the film. So that isn't even necessarily a consistent thing.
So do you think we get Malick wrong? And what is there? And well, do we not get him fully enough? Is that what it is?
I think there is a part of the critical community and a part of the audience which are always going to be resistant to this sort of cinema. Pauline Kael said of Days of Heaven, "Oh, it's another pretty Christmas tree for you to hang your damned metaphors from." And so that's like, okay, you're so resistant to this that of course you're not going to get anything from it, and that's up to you. That's fine. But is that really? And that, by the way, that was a common criticism of Days of Heaven, which is considered a masterpiece today. But when it came out, even people who liked it were saying, "Is it too beautiful? Isn't it? Doesn't it look too good? Isn't the music too well, combined with the images?" So he's never had a uniform critical reception. There's always been some people who've liked him, some people who've hated him. And as his career has gone on, that has become exaggerated. And that means also that the people who like him, as much as the people who don't like him, can sometimes be guilty of sort of watching the films to get material for their arguments rather than watching the films and just watching the films as films.
All right, let's bring back the subject to you, John. You being the more important in the conversation. How's it been? You've gone on this journey, you've written this fabulous book, you've gone into the heart of Terrence Malick, and you've come out the other side, and here it is, all the words are in the right order, and it's in print and paper, and what has that whole experience been like for you?
It's really good to get to it's really brilliant to sort of pull back the curtain and see what you guys have been having to do. As I've been interviewing you, as you said at the beginning, for years, and I've been reading your books. I've been reading the books of my other guests and coming to my own conclusions and judgments, but also, this person hasn't done the research to XYZ, or this person's done amazing amounts of research, and how did they do it and everything. And now I'm on the other side of that curtain, that divide, and it's just been such an adventure. I mean, I've flown to Texas. I've got traipsed around these places. I visited his family home in Waco. I visited the street in Smithville where they shot Tree of Life. I visited his school in St. Stephen's. I talked to his associates. I talked to so many people. It's given me access to so many people who I would never have spoken to. People who haven't spoken to anyone for a long time, like Brooke Adams hasn't spoken to anybody for ages. She's a painter now. Doesn't consider herself an actor. And that adventure, it's just been so glorious, to use a Terrence Malick word. It's been a really enriching experience. It's been the best adventure I've ever had as a film writer, and it sort of makes me think, the next time I turn to writing a work of fiction or something, these things will sort of feed off each other, and there's a symbiotic relationship to all writing. All writing makes you a better writer, I feel. I'll write better novels because of this book.
And are you ready for reviews of you? I don't know if you've read it yet. It's an emotional experience. When you someone writes about your book well, or they write about it poorly, or someone complains that the cover arrived dented, whatever it is that comes up, you find, and, you're turning your own eye upon yourself in a sense, because, we've both reviewed films for most of our careers. Now people are reviewing us. It's you're very vulnerable. This is your creation. You put your heart and soul into it. You've been on a long journey, and it's been very hard work. You really had to sort of kill yourself to do it. Are you ready for the reviews? I'm sure they're going to be great. Don't get me wrong. I'm not.
They're not all going to be great. I know that for a fact.
Well, yeah, because you're probably going to be reviewed by academics as well as book reviewers, and I'm sure that's a complicated market.
Yeah, absolutely. There's already been reviews, some good. I mean, there's one, I've already experienced that thing of going, no, you haven't got it at all. With, I think it was the Publishers Weekly said that it was, there's nothing new here, and it's, this is just stuff we already know. And I was sort of like, oh man, have you read it? I mean, are you sure? Are you sure you know everything? And you want to, and there's somebody has reviewed it on Goodreads already and given it a 2-star review, and I'm like, it's not out. It's not out until Tuesday. What are you doing? And they called it a
there's the galleys out, and some people, you need to talk to your publisher, but I don't know. They sometimes send these out, and people read them on that, don't they? And
got to stamp this out before it gets going. I think I'd be a liar to say I'm not thin-skinned. I am very sensitive to criticism, and I'm also, it's a terrible combination. I'm very thin-skinned, and I'm also a little bit narcissistic. So I am going to be hunting down. I mean, I've got a Google search alarm, a Google alarm that goes off whenever my name appears on the internet, so I can, search, find out, Bleasdale Malik. Anytime that comes up, in a sentence, I'll immediately see the review and read it. I think that's a process that you've got to go through. I think that's just something you've got to, because ultimately my dream as a writer is to be read. The best result would be people reading it and loving it, and people reading it and engaging with it and thinking about it. The second best is people reading it and hating it. The third is people not, and the worst is people just not reading it. So I'll take the first two, and if I'd rather have more one than two, but I'd rather have one and two than three. That's the absolute worst.
It's Oscar Wilde, is it? The only thing worse than not being talked about is being talked about, or the other way around. The only worse than being talked about is not being talked about. Did you find? I'll come to a conclusion. But did you find your writing style was affected by not only the process of biography in itself, which has got its kind of rules and the way things happen, but the way Terrence Malick's films are and the way Terrence Malick is? Did you find there was a sort of feedback loop that, I read about Mad Max a few years ago, and you find you write faster when you write about Mad Max. It's kind of imbued with a sense of pace, and your sentences got shorter, and it got all these kind of rhythms to them. I thought, I'm writing like action cinema. So did you find your writing style sort of adapted to the world you were in?
One sense, thematically, definitely yes, because the first 4 or 5 films, one of the themes that I recognized was beginnings and origins. And so that made me really want to go into the beginnings as not just like a biographer, but also as this is actually one of if Terrence Malick was writing this book, this would be one of the things he would be interested in. I mean, for God's sake, he goes to the beginning of the universe to work out what happened in Waco in the 1950s. So I feel that I can sort of have that. In terms of the writing style, well, one thing I have to credit publicly Paul Cronin, because he's a writer and a publisher himself. He wrote a brilliant book with Werner Herzog for Faber. I had him on the podcast, and when I had the news that I had the book, I obviously emailed a few people like yourself, like Paul, asking for advice, seeing what they do. And Paul very generously just said, I'd be interested to read you when you feel it's, you're at the right point. And he sort of became a like unofficial copy editor. I would send him stuff, and he would send it back with like red pen all over it, and really be asking sort of tough questions. And it was copy edited when it got to the final thing, but it was copy edited very lightly when it got to the final stage by the publisher themselves. It was like, did you mean this when you mean this, sort of thing. And having a dedicated film writer specifically do this was a huge bonus, and it became a very fruitful. The book would not be anywhere near the level it is, if that level is high, as high as that level might be or not. I mean, I'm not going to be the one to say, without having that help. And I don't think it was only Paul, but Paul was definitely a principal, unsung hero, because it was absolutely, it was hours of his time were devoted to this, and he was just that. I think you need someone like that. Every writer needs someone like that to sometimes just say, you're being a bit funny here, or you're this. I know you're very pleased with yourself about this line, but it doesn't really go here, or just, I'm lost. What are you trying to say? This paragraph doesn't make any sense, So I found my style was vastly improved by that. Was vastly improved by being tightened, and the Malick thing. I just felt that there were so many serious ideas and so many very specific ideas that I had to deal with. I just found myself reverting to my academic years, where I was writing about Shelley for my PhD, and Shelley is a little known romantic poet. It's little read these days. But if you've ever read Shelley, you'll realize why he's little known, because he's an incredibly clever and sophisticated writer, and you have to be kind of clever to appreciate him. And when I was writing about Clevey, when I was writing about Shelley, I had to get up to his level. I had to get up to his mark in order to not just say stupid stuff about. And the same thing's true of Malick. Is he's so up there. I mean, he doesn't wear it like that, but Jack Fisk said he knows everything about everything. He was saying he knows about cinematography as much as a cinematographer. He knows as much about art design as an art designer. He writes his own scripts, so he's the writer. So to get up to his level when thinking about his films and when thinking about how those films come about, he knows as much about financing the movie as the producers do. When he gets up there, you as a writer have to be up there as well, and you have to be prepared as well. And so that disciplines you. You can't just have a throwaway comment because you think it sounds neat, and because it's like, he'll never read this book, but I wouldn't want anyone to say even to him, there's this guy who wrote this book and he says you finance this movie with X or with Y rather than, and get it wrong, or he's interpreting it in this way, and that's something that isn't even relevant, that didn't even exist in 1974, or it was that more than style. It was much more, I just want to be absolutely at the height of this guy's, well, at least in view of the top.
Okay, well, I'll finish with the dumb journalist question. Just to bring it all back down to level. What's next, John? You've written your great Malick book, but I know you're not going to stop there. I mean, obviously, you're a novelist, you're a working journalist. I saw your wonderful pictures from different parts of Europe where you seem to dash off to. I don't know how you find the time, but you got these planes with your laptop. But what in terms of film books is sort of on the horizon or even underway?
Yeah, underway actually. I've got several projects underway. One is coming to the end right now, which is a book on Jonathan Glazer, which is going to be it's not going to be a biography. It's going to be a critical study of his advertising and musical videos and short films and his 4 feature films. So it's going to be like four big chapters and then interstices going throughout. And that's going to be called Visible Darkness and will be out in June of next year. And that's going to be available from Sticking Place Books, which is actually Paul Cronin's independently run publishing house. So that's a little bit of payback as well of me saying, thank you so much for the help. I mean, I'm very, very pleased he's publishing it, but he was sort of saying, he kind of did say, you have to do one for me now. And I'm more than happy to do that. So I'm going to be doing that. I'm also in the process of delivering a script, which is, again, going on the other side of the curtain. It's another curtain once more. There's already a script which has been optioned, which I can't talk about for contractual reasons, but another script is sort of on the way through the pipeline. So that's a very exciting development. And finally, there is a novel that I've been developing for some years. I've written and rewritten, and I'm going to get the final iteration of that together, which is a sort of apocalyptic. It's kind of based on threads. It's kind of like...
Oh, cheerful. You're of the same age. We both saw Threads at the same time, and school the next day was very quiet.
Exactly.
We were all like, "Oh my god!"
The bus ride. I mean, I remember literally at school having conversations about, if you hear the alarm, you just start walking towards the centre of town because you do not want to survive. You don't want to survive. And that's like, how old were we then? We were like, when was Threads? What year was Threads?
87 was it?
87. So I would have been like
maybe a bit 60 and definitely.
So I'd have been like 13 maybe or something, 13, 14, and I was already thinking of like basically the end of the world, and that would be it.
Anyway, there's a book in that film as well. There's a book in the Threads. Someone should, I don't know who, extraordinary film.
Yeah, that would be an amazing BFI. They should do a monograph on that. I mean, I keep emailing BFI and asking them if I can do the Children of Men book that they have yet to do. That would be another one that's on my wish list to do, definitely. But I don't think I want to do another biography. I think another biography feels like adultery.
You never know. It comes along and then it's a different challenge.
I'm talking to the polyamorous Ian Nathan.
I get about,
with all his biographies.
Well, it's... the challenges come, and then you'll get me from this very podcast. You might get the BFI going, I would love a biography of Ken Loach, a new one, and you'll wake up and go, well, maybe Ken Loach. That's
Ken
interesting.
Loach. I wouldn't mind.
And the parts of your brain start to fire, and then you're like, I know I say I wouldn't, but maybe I will.
It's something. I think it's something as basic sometimes as well as thinking, I'd quite like to just sit and revisit all those films. It's sometimes it's just that. That'd give me an excuse to watch all of those films in context. And who doesn't want the excuse to do that and call it working?
John, this has been so good, and I'm very proud to have hosted your podcast with you as the guest, and then it's a very symbolic episode, I think, because you've done so many and you've done so much for the world of film writing and promoting authors, and in a tough world, as we both know, getting yourself noticed, when you've even written a book, it's very tough, and you're doing an enormously important job. So please continue with your podcasts, but also continue to write, because you are just fantastic. And everybody out there who's listened to this, I so recommend Magic Hour, because Malik is an extraordinary force in film, and I think we needed a biography that just went on that journey with him, and you've done just that.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Ian. I really appreciate it, man. Kind words.